Okay, this is chapter 69 of The Night Singer. 69. Once the prosecutor had sent confirmation that Gabriel Anderson would be reprimanded in custody, Hannah spoke to Ove. She told him that she wanted to go over to Rebecca's to tell her the news, and he gave her his blessing immediately. Eric had hurried off to the hospital as soon as the interview was over. Sophia was already there and had sent a message to say that Ivaka was through the worst of it. The charge the prosecutor had recommended was gross negligence manslaughter, which carried a sentence of up to 6 years in jail. Considering Joel had been alive when Gabriel left him at the rest area, the prosecutor was confident the crime should be considered grossly negligent. It was highly unlikely that anyone else had arrived at the scene and moved his body afterward. Hannah didn't feel any sympathy for Gabriel, but her heart ached for his family and for his children in particular. She knew all too well what they would have to go through now, and Lena already felt guilty because of the hash. Above all, however, her heart ached for Joel, the 15-year-old who would never get to live their life or discover who they really were, and for Rebecca. Hannah hoped it was true and that her friend hadn't seen a thing. She also felt a deep sense of sorrow for herself, for everything that had happened over the years. The feeling deepened as she drove into Guardby. Hannah took in the houses and the trees passing by, and it was as though all the different layers of time seemed to merge together, forming one singular painful present. Would she ever be able to move past it? She knew how hard it was going to be to talk to Rebecca, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she turned off onto Snaggeton. Only no one had seen Fanny since the search, and neither she nor her mother were answering their phones. Hannah pulled up in the yard, and the sight of the girl hunched over by her moped sent a jolt of relief through her. She climbed out of the car and walked over to Fanny. "What do you want?" Fanny asked without looking up. It was as though she had changed shape yet again. Gone was all the hardness and fear, leaving behind nothing but a troubled child. "We know you didn't stab Joel. Did you come over here just to tell me that?" "Yes. Thanks." Hannah turned to leave, but Fanny stopped her. "So who did it then?" "I'm sorry, I can't say." Hannah climbed back into the car. She could have lectured Fanny about everything she had done, beating up Joel, forcing young children to give her money, how wrong it all was. But she was fairly sure Fanny already knew. The question was what the teenager planned to do with the knowledge going forward. It was still too early to say. Hannah would have to talk to her again later, once everything had settled down. The prosecutor would almost certainly bring charges against her, both for the assault and for selling drugs. By the time Hannah reached Rebecca's house, both Petrie and Molly were home. She decided to talk to the three of them together, for Molly's sake above all else. The girl would be able to sense the tension in the air, and not knowing was far worse than actually being told the truth. Hannah remembered that feeling from her mother's illness, the conversation she had been left out of, but still managed to pick up on, the way everyone had told her and Christopher their mother would be fine, even though it was a lie. Hannah also knew that she was in better shape to tell Molly than Rebecca was. She gathered them in the living room. "We know how Joel died," she said. "How?" asked Molly, who was sitting on her mother's lap. Petrie hugged them both to him. "He fell over and hurt himself on a knife." "In Mockelmosen?" Hannah hesitated to say Gabriel's name, but she knew that Molly would hear it at some point either way. It was better that she find out this way, rather than catching a whisper from someone who didn't think she would understand. "No, right outside here, but Gabriel moved him. He thought Joel was already dead, but he wasn't." Hannah studied Rebecca as she mentioned their neighbor and realized that she already knew. When had she managed to work it out? Why did he move him? Both Petrie and Rebecca were allowing Molly to ask her questions, and Hannah was answering them as best she could in a straightforward manner a 6-year-old would understand. To some extent, having Molly present also made things easier for her. She knew it would be much harder when she was alone with Rebecca, but Hannah didn't have a good answer to this particular question. "I don't actually know," she said. "That was silly of him," said Molly. "Yes, it was." Molly seemed to be thinking, but she didn't have any more questions right now. They would probably come later. It was clear that her parents had plenty. Hannah caught Rebecca's eye. "Should we go outside?" Rebecca nodded. They sat down on the swinging set, looking out toward the small woods. "So Joel saw us?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, Gabriel spied him as he was about to leave and ran out to talk to him. That was when Joel fell over and injured himself on the knife." "Why did he have a knife?" He'd snuck out to meet a gang in the woods behind the school. He took it to defend himself, but never actually used it, or not to do anything other than wave it around anyway. He was beaten up in the woods. Since both the teenagers and Gabriel have admitted their parts in what happened, I can answer more of your questions now. Rebecca didn't speak. You really didn't see anything? Hannah asked her. I was in the toilet in the studio, crying because Gabriel had dumped me. I thought my world was about to end. Why didn't you tell us that you and Gabriel were in the studio? You can stop with the accusation, said Rebecca. I can't take it. I'm being hard enough on myself as it is. She shuffled away from Hannah. I'm not accusing you, said Hannah. I just want to understand. Rebecca turned away and wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. It didn't occur to me that it might be important, and because I don't want anyone to know. Now in floods of tears, Rebecca raised her hands to her eyes. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then moved closer and put an arm around her. She wasn't sure Rebecca wanted it there, but Rebecca began whimpering the way she had when she first found out that Joel was dead. She continued for a few minutes before lowering her hands and staring at Hannah with a look of such despair that Hannah came close to turning away. Is it true that Joel didn't die right away? She said. That I could have saved him? We don't know whether anyone could have saved him, but he was still alive when Gabriel dropped him off at the rest area, yes. Then why did Gabriel think he was dead? I don't know, he was drunk. He probably panicked and couldn't think straight. That bastard, Rebecca shouted. That's an understatement. Hannah went into more detail about what Gabriel had told her, his excuses for not calling an ambulance or shouting for Rebecca, the kind of things she hadn't wanted to say in front of Molly. If I hadn't been in the studio with Gabriel then, Rebecca couldn't manage any more, and Hannah felt an urge to pry the guilt away from her, placing it squarely on Gabriel's shoulders, where it belonged, but Rebecca wasn't susceptible to that kind of comforting. Stop it, she hissed. They sat quietly for a while instead, staring toward the trees. Hannah decided that she would have to get a swinging set for her own little garden, that she would put it out by the fields. Sorry, said Rebecca. Thank you for telling us while Molly was there. Don't think I could have managed it myself. You need to tell Petrie, too. We probably won't be able to keep all this a secret. He worked it out during the barbecue, that Gabriel and I... It was plain to see that Rebecca was back there again, thinking it was all her fault. Her face was twisted in self-hatred, but this time Hannah had no intention of comforting her. After a while, her features seemed to settle down. Hannah knew what it was like, being torn between feelings that didn't fit together. What you said about Joel, said Rebecca, about him being trans, or not knowing whether he was a boy or a girl. I think it was probably true. It explains so much from when he was younger. One day he would be playing with dolls, and the next he would be kicking a ball around. I know a lot of kids do that, but the switch was always so abrupt with him. It was like he was searching for something. Rebecca began to sob. Why didn't he just talk to me about it? He must have been so lonely. I would have understood, maybe not right away, but I would have. According to both Tina and Nadine, he wanted to tell you. He just hadn't picked up the courage yet. It also took him a long time to make sense of it himself. He might not have fully understood it all, and how easy it is to talk about something you don't really understand. Rebecca nodded. Can I have his sketchbooks? Of course, I'll make sure to get them back to you as soon as possible. I went over to Eureka's after you left earlier today, you know. I thought you might. Your impulse control has never been the greatest. Rebecca smiled through her tears. I hate her too, because she suspected something about Joel and Gabriel but didn't say a word. If she'd just done that, I might have found out sooner. I wasn't so nice to her. Listen, I understand. Let this sink in for a while and then see how you feel. But whatever you do, don't take it out on their kids, on Lena and Elias. Rebecca shook her head. Of course not. For a few moments, all they could hear was the squeaking of the swinging seat. I don't know what I ever saw in him, Rebecca eventually said. Your taste in men has never exactly been great, said Hannah. For a split second, she wondered if she had gone too far, but Rebecca simply laughed. A moment later, her expression was full of hatred for herself again. But Petrie seems nice, said Hannah. Yeah, he is, said Rebecca. And he says he's forgiven me for everything with Gabriel. But given it was him who... How is Petrie supposed to... How am I... Hannah placed a hand on Rebecca's. You were the only person who was really there for me while everything was going on with my dad, and I was a total shit who just got up and left. You were, but you're here now. I'm here now, and I'll help you move forward however I can. They kept swinging. Hannah had deliberately avoided saying she would help Rebecca move through this, because she knew her friend would likely never manage that. There was no other side where everything would suddenly be fine. Listen, said Hannah, there's something I need to ask you. Okay. Hannah had been thinking that it might help to distract Rebecca if she talked about something else, but she suddenly felt unsure. Just say it, said Rebecca. You know what I asked you earlier? Whether you had talked about me with Axel? He called you a liar and said if anyone should know that, I should. He said you'd never liked me. Rebecca simply shook her head. What'd you say to Axel about me? I honestly don't remember. I think I said I was tired of all the drama, but they were just words. I didn't mean... You know what Axel is like. He does whatever he can to provoke people. Yeah, I know. It's just... Hannah trailed off. She didn't know how to explain it. After Fabian broke up with her, it was as though she had been thrown back in time, back to everything that had prevented her from moving on with her life. She had decided to go and talk to her father, but she hadn't made it in time, and that had almost killed her too. Hannah had done everything she could to repress that moment. The way she had lain awake in Bargamosen, staring up at the ceiling. Her alarm had been about to ring, but she hadn't managed to get a wink of sleep. Right there and then, it hadn't felt like she had anything to live for, and she had gone over to the medicine cabinet in the kitchen and emptied the boxes of paracetamol and ibuprofen. As she raised the pills to her mouth, she had caught sight of the tattoo on her arm, reminding her of everything her grandmother had done for her. She had realized that her life had been good once, and thrown away the pills, deciding to make some real changes. It was only once she drove over the Öland Bridge that she had really understood what the first step involved, moving back to the island. She couldn't go back to Stockholm. There was nothing for her there. My boss is giving me the investigation report, she said, about my dad and what he did. Why? Don't you already know what happened? I'm not so sure anymore. In truth, she had never really been sure. Despite his heavy drinking, Lars had never shown any violent tendencies. It made no sense that he would brutally murder a woman like that, not for the reasons they claimed. The only possible explanation was that someone else had been involved, or that it had nothing to do with the money Esther was said to have stashed away, that it had to do with something else entirely. Though who and why, that was where she got stuck. Get out of here. If you stay, you'll die. Hannah couldn't leave Öland. If she did, she would still die, in every sense but the literal. The only way for her to move forward was to find out what had happened when Esther died, and ideally without anyone else knowing what she was up to. Perhaps she shouldn't have even mentioned it to Rebecca, but Hannah trusted her. She would keep quiet if Hannah asked her to. Besides, Rebecca had her own personal hell to navigate right now. Hannah would start by reading through the investigation report, and then she would ask the questions she had never dared to ask. Questions for everyone who might know anything about how or why Esther had been killed. She would find out who was behind the threatening phone calls. That was her only way forward, and it scared the shit out of her.